So today I have my volunteer hat on very soundly for the Helford Marine Conservation Group. They've been around for well over 30 years now, and I've been with them for about 10 years. And together we're like the Helford River, we are totally marine. But we do retain an interest in what's going on about us, because obviously there's that crossover. And I'm going to work my way through these slides now. I always have trouble when it comes to making up presentations for the Helford Marine Conservation Group, because I have some absolutely outstanding photos that are given to me by people, and just sort of incorporating them in. So you'll find slides that are just all photos, but because a lot of you may not have a lot of knowledge about what lies under the water, it's actually just quite nice to show you all that and walk you through it. And I also want to say thank you for inviting me, and I've had a really positive experience so far. The talks this morning were absolutely great. I grew up in a farm in Cornwall, mixed farm in mid-Cornwall, so I found it all really interesting. Okay, the Helford. Sorry, can everyone see? Can everyone hear me? So the Helford River, it's the most southerly in Britain, because we'll think about that, the most southerly estuary in Britain, and it runs east to west, which is a fairly unusual direction. It means that we're prey to these horrible east winds when they come. It's got a shoreline of 47 kilometres, and that just means that the Helford has very many hidden places. A lot of people might, come down to Helford Passage, go out in a boat, and play around, but not everyone gets into every single nook and cranny, including myself. So 10 years ago, I used to spend a lot of my time just getting lost and finding these places. With the atmosphere in the upper reaches that appears timeless, I mean, totally. And in fact, even in high summer, sometimes you could be out and you'll be the only person there. So it's a really magical place. So the geographical name for the Helford as a feature is a ria. It's a drowned river valley, and it's created about 10,000 years ago in the retreat of the last glaciers. So although we often call it an estuary, we call it the river, it is in fact a fully marine and high-sided, if you like, with the trees coming right down to the edge, because it was, so the river was just completely flooded out and the valley was flooded out all those years ago. We talk about rewilding. Well, this is a picture that actually just shows that there's nothing very wild here. And we've been influencing the Helford River since around 4000 BC. So clues to the previous generations just lie everywhere when you're walking around the river, all the old artifacts and archaeological remains. There's a great book, actually. I'll grab that. If anyone's interested in getting this off Amazon, Helford Estuary Historic Audit. So when you find something down on the end of a creek, like a fish trap or something like that, you think, oh, what do they know about that? It'll all be in here. So field systems and streams, and the old quays and the slipways and the lime kilns, and you've got the fish traps, as I say, when you've got the water that, you've got these tidal areas at the bottom of your freshwater inputs. And it was once a very crowded waterway. It's port to the Helston. You've got building materials, timber shipped in, coal. Coal was being shipped up the river till the 1950s, probably even later than that. And granite shipped out. And then you've got a rich mining area. You only have to see the they don't often belong to the farms anymore, but some of the old farmhouses and the mining houses and things, to see how rich it was. These old places, they just reflect our changing fortunes, really. So that's the remains of an old lime kiln there at the mouth of Frenchman's Creek. You see all the bits and pieces in there. That's the fishermen actually come in and land their fish. There's a boat that lands there, and they keep all their fishing boxes are tucked away in the lime kiln. That's a bit of an old slipway and wall down at Calamansac. That's a beautiful old coppiced oak in Benalec Wood. And then as you walk around, you probably know places like this Greek here, you've got this lovely old clapper bridge. There's those sort of features everywhere as you walk about. And of course on the south side, a lot of it belongs to the National Trust, and there's plenty of access there. In the bottom corner there, we've got the old oyster building. The building still exists. I quite like this old photo though, because it showed when they first built it, they allowed access for the tide coming in there underneath, because the tide just comes right up to that building, because it's actually built on a beach. And then you've got the beach to one side there. But in fact, in recent years, they've filled that in and built up higher. So it tells you something about sea level rise, I think. I nicked this off the West Country Rivers Trust, because that's a really nice picture of how the catchments actually affect the Helford there, with all the sampling points that they want us to do. So we need to get busy, get weaving. There's quite a few of them taken up on the south side already, which is handy. But anyway, that just shows you what a big influence all the surrounding farmland has on the Helford there. And I don't think that would ever happen now. That's an old Iron Age hill fort with a bungalow built in the middle, showing a little bit of... Won't get that anymore. That's taken at Morne Smith. I always, whenever I do, I just can't resist putting that one in. I don't know, it's just like talking about human influences. Okay, agriculture and the pace of change in the latter part of the 20th century, that has a huge influence on the river, as you can imagine, with the post-war production. I'm not going to go into agriculture too much, because I tend to just skirt around the edges. But joining the Common Market EU, more intensive production, paid to produce, paid not to produce, they're all things that influence us down in the marine environment. Changes in crops, like the old maize here. The oyster industry is another thing that's had a profound influence on the environment, the marine environment down there. We've lost a good deal of our native oysters. This is a picture from the early 20th century. You can see it's an actual whole bank of oysters. I think there's quite a lot of debate about where this picture was taken, but it's actually going out towards the mouth of Port Navis Creek there, because you can see the shear on the one side there. Anyway, that is just a reef of native oysters. Now, these days, we might get a reef of the non-native Pacific oysters, but the native oysters are few and far between, but they are coming back gradually, as they haven't been harvested for the last 5 years or so, 6 years or so. I mean, there's a difference between harvesting oysters at the oysterage, where they actually take young oysters and put them out in the estuary to fatten, and our actual native oyster that should belong there. And I think it's something that becomes a bit of a grey area, but generally, I think countrywide we say we know that we overexploited oysters, and poor water quality and everything has led to their demise. But we are a marine conservation group, marine conservation zone, specifically for the native oyster now, have been for a few years, and they're already a biodiversity priority species. So if you like going down to the creekside edge to forage, we actually ask that you don't take the oysters, the flat oyster, because as they get, the bigger they get, the more spat they can let go, and then the more likely they are to continue to breed and thrive. And yes, we've had the introduction of the non-native Pacific oyster, who's like the the bigger cousin who's much, much tougher. And that one tends to take over these areas instead. Poweveril Creek, just as a little example of what can go on in our narrower creeks. You can see here the massive green sort of enteromorpha seaweeds and things. You tend to get that when you get a lot of nutrient input. So, in fact, I'm on that, and I'm quite away from the Helford River, but I'm actually on that river system that flows into Poweveril Creek. But generally, from a farming point of view, it's actually been quite good because the farmers have been in schemes for a very long time, going back to the higher level stewardships and things. And I think certainly Goongilling's farm is in a FIPL scheme now. Thanks, Sean and ANOB. But it does have the Constantine sewage works, which I say it has a profound effect on the water there, and the combined sewage outflow, which basically goes every time there is rainfall. The estuary, poor old estuary, has to cope with that. So we've got additional things, oil spills. I've had to deal with 3 oil spills this year. I mean, what? Over the last 10 years, I think we've just had 1. So anyone who has an oil tank, please go home and check it. Because they can leak away without your knowledge. And of course, the occasional algal bloom, they're very rare, but they can cause a good deal of damage too. So these are all things that can affect us down on the river. I've gathered a few photos over the years. This one in the top left there was taken by a friend of mine in Carn Creek. It's a lovely image of the salt water coming in against, there must have been some heavy rainfall there because there's quite a lot of silt coming in out of that. That's the sort of Carn Gillen Creek area there. Bottom left, that was results of the first oil spill we had that summer with heavy diesel oil. It just shows, you can see on the top of it, that sort of slick. They estimated, the Environment Agency estimated, that was just 10 litres of heavy oil from a boat that was being broken up in Anna Maria Creek. And basically he just opened what you'd consider to be empty oil tanks. He just had split it open and left the tide to wash in and take it all out, and actually caused quite a big slick going out of there and then upriver. And I think it did make the headlines, didn't it? I think it went on to Radio Cornwall in the news. So that was one of them. And this side, this is actually a fairly recent photo, actually, but that's someone doing some building work. I think they're creating a holiday park in an old quarry, and that is right in the middle of the densest woodlands, and probably about a mile from where the chap was doing the work. And it just goes to show how quickly it can do that sort of thing. So yeah, and so I know that we've been seeing a lot of brown water already this morning, and I promise everything will get a bit more positive after this. But this was rainfall in, I think, probably 2015, and that's at Port Nevis, and that's the stream. What I will say is I've been involved sort of on the periphery of water quality initiatives around the Helford since about 2014. And I must say that the effort's gone to and the work that's been done by landowners has been absolutely terrific. And we see less and less of this sort of thing. It still does happen, but we see less of it. And then bottom corner there, you've got the results. 2008, it's a natural event, but it is due to a build-up of, it's to do with sea temperatures and a build-up of nutrients. There was an algae bloom that slid into Helford River and killed a great number of fish, and including these worm species here. And that was a photograph from that. So all the things that can happen to us But, you know, these rivers are really, really resilient. So these are a couple of photos, because I love my photos, just to show you the sort of, I mean, this is a particular habitat to the fowl and the Helford. It's called merle. Has anyone heard of that? I'm going to tell you about, it's a coralline seaweed. So it's sort of, yes, it looks sort of corally, and it forms these masses. It can actually take thousands of years to develop into deep beds. We're just actually recently this year doing some work on it with some core samples to see how it, I know we're all going to be fighting over what stores the best and hugest amounts of carbon, but these are fabulous carbon stores. And they build up into a mass, and we're very fortunate still to have a bed in the Helford. I don't know what's going to happen to them with climate change. I mean, they have all the same threats as everything else, really, but the merle is at its furthest southerly point, so you expect to be some difficulties with it, with sea temperatures and things at some point. But absolutely brilliant for harbouring all kinds of sea life. You can see these tendrils coming out here. Those are starfish, and sometimes in the beds you can just see masses of these tendrils coming up. And then we've got, we have both cuttlefish and squid, and in fact, if you can actually buy Helford squid to eat at the moment. There's small boats out jigging for squid at the moment, where they come in for the winter. And on the bottom left is one of the newbies on the block. That's the gilt head bream, and that's a little baby one that's been taken up from the top of our estuaries on our surveys. But they just become a really great, there on the left, that's the sort of size they get to. And I mean, this is what we're doing it for. I mean, the Helford Marine Conservation Group has always been about the community, commerce and conservation. I used to joke actually that their strapline, conservation, came last, and why was I working for them, but there we go. That's a bit, funny enough, that's not Helford, but they have been picked up on that size in the Helford. That's over on Truro River. So for the anglers amongst you, there's some very good eating going on there. And then, of course, we've got our own little fishing fleet that come into the Helford. There's no netting in the Helford anymore, or there shouldn't be. If you see it, report it. But they actually come in, they're out in Falmouth Bay, and then they come in to offload. And they come in all sizes, as you can see the little boat on the way out there. Back to some more lovely habitats. Another great carbon sink, that's something that gathers up lots of dead matter around it, is the seagrass that we hear an awful lot about at the moment. And then you've got reefs as well. And these are all features of the special area conservation. Which are absolutely, hello, absolutely marvellous. And seagrass is, if you want to run through the ways it's going to help us with climate change, it actually stabilises the seabed around the edges of the coastline. It sort of attenuates wave action up to a point, stabilises up to a point. I'll talk about that in a minute. It's a great haven for fish, and we get things like one of our iconic fish for the Helford is that thornback ray there below, which actually I think was taken in the Helford over the merle beds, but say it hunts and survives in here. The Helford River has recorded they've recorded over 80 species of fish now. Pace of change is rapid. So, and I think that's the thing, if I was going to get worried about anything, it's how fast things are changing. And for long-lived species and habitats like merle, they take hundreds of years to accumulate, and some of them thousands of years old. Those things, they're not going to adapt overnight. So sea temperature, runoff and storm damage, it's all affecting our marine life, and it's what we can do about it. And the main thing is the reducing human pressures. If we can give marine life time and space, it will adapt. It does adapt. And we have got some good news stories. I was asked to put a little bit in about the beavers. So, as a good conservationist who likes to see explosions of diversity, this is a few little series of photos of Woodland Valley Farm. Top left is a new pool that was actually developed outside the pool they went into within 6 months. That's December 2017. I think they went in June 2017, so they'd managed to make all that. The one below, December 2018. 2019, I went away. I didn't spend Christmas there, so I didn't go back. And that's the winter of 2020. And it has changed completely again since then. They're winter pictures, so you don't see a lot of the vegetation, but in fact, when I was back there this summer, that was all wholly vegetated again and changed quickly. And these are in a very small area, so you can really see the impact. Their impact is hard, but in fact, you can also see the myriad of little pools and things that are just brilliant for wildlife. So you just get explosions of good freshwater invertebrates for fish to feed on. And the reason I'm talking about this for the Helford is, of course, we have fishes that actually cross over from freshwater to marine water. So we've got our common eel. We get a number of eels, and we get both sort of large juveniles and glass eels up in the rivers. And we get trout, and we get sea trout. And we should have salmon. And occasionally the odd salmon does nose its way in. They do get seen. And that link, just improving the freshwater inputs into that, just makes such a huge difference to our commercial fish species. Cute picture. Those are down at Gweek. If anyone wants to go and see something more locally, then they've got beavers down at the Seal Sanctuary at Gweek now, and those are a couple of the youngsters that are down there. That picture on the top left just shows you actually about, that's a very low tide on Helford Bar, where you've got seagrass. All the little black splodges there are what they call sea grapes. And is anyone going to jump up and tell me what sea grapes are? They're cuttlefish eggs. But what I like about this picture, well, there's a few things I like about this picture. One, that is a brand new patch of seagrass. The last 4 years, we've had seagrass redeveloping. The Helford Passage used to be all seagrass all the way through. And the last few years, we've been getting these big patches coming back again. We just get more and more every year. And those, the lovely thing about that is, A, it's coming back, it's there. And the other thing is by the eggs there, there's actually a snail, garden snail, and those are oak leaves. So it just shows that the estuary's doing its job, life goes round, so it gathers up all those dead oak leaves that come into the estuary, all that sort of thing. It just tells a lot of different things. And another good news story is, we sort of kick back at designations and controls and fishing controls and things like that. But that little common dolphin there, we see so much more of those sort of larger mammals now than we ever used to. Coming in chasing fish, which is great, good news. We've just started doing our panels again for our interpretation boards. I don't know if you've seen them anywhere around the river, but we have, I think there's about 14 around the river. And these new boards actually show that development of seagrass there coming in. And then we've got all the seagrass here. You might have heard about the no anchor zone. That sort of takes care of that very dense patch. Because at one point, all this over here and that there and that had gone. It had been there, but it just, in the 1980s, it just disappeared. And people can argue why. the temperatures, whether it was something put on the land, whether it was dredging, you know, whatever. But for whatever reason, it went. And in fact, our intertidal seagrass went completely as well, and it's not come back yet. But it just shows we've actually got lots of natural generation there. Oh, and that bit in the middle is these are our lovely merle beds. But those are going out around the river, just showing the complexity with water quality advice and things like that going into it as well. So that's one of our latest things. The Helford Marine Conservation Group, yes, we raise awareness, we hold events, so we hold community events and things, but actually one of our really strong points is advocacy as well, because we have an advisory group which involves quite a few members of the community and businesses and things, combined with the Environment Agency, Natural England. So we work together the results of those meetings go up to the SAC, the Special Area Conservation Management Forum, which is for the whole of that Fal and Helford Estuaries complex. And it's really important that people with their feet on the ground here get to talk to the people up there. And so we can just say what is actually going on. Yeah, and I just have to have that. If you're interested in the sort of the history of the Helford River, that is the most comprehensive book we've got at the moment. I want to go right back to the Neolithic, from the Neolithic to modern day. That's a great book to have, and I use that and the historic guide there as well. Well, I think that's me finished, really. I don't think I've got any more. No, I'm done. Lovely.